The bright lights of the Good Morning America studio cast a warm, golden hue over the polished floor as the production crew made final adjustments. It was a typical Monday morning for most, but for the staff at GMA, it was anything but ordinary. Meghan Markle was scheduled for a live, in-studio interview, a rare appearance since her controversial departure from royal life. Hype had been building for days. Promos teased her upcoming Netflix project and her new foundation's initiatives. But more than anything, viewers tuned in to witness the Duchess speak without the heavy editing of a documentary or the safety net of pre-recorded segments. As the countdown to the live broadcast ticked down, George Stephanopoulos sat at the center of the set, reviewing his notecards. Known for his calm authority and measured delivery, George wasn't one to ambush his guests. But he had been in journalism long enough to understand the fine line between civility and accountability. This morning, that line would be tested. Meghan entered the studio precisely on time, accompanied by her assistant and a member of her PR team. She wore an elegant off-white pantsuit paired with nude heels. Her hair was softly curled, and her demeanor was composed, confident, and ready, or so it seemed. After a brief exchange of greetings off-camera, the show returned from commercial. The GMA logo swirled across screens in homes around the nation as the camera zoomed in on George and Meghan, seated across from one another. The moment had arrived. "Good morning, everyone," George began, his tone pleasant. "Joining us today is someone who's been the subject of headlines around the globe, activist, philanthropist, and former Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle." "Meghan, thanks for being here." "Thank you for having me, George," she replied with a calm smile. For the first few minutes, the conversation stayed in safe waters. They discussed Meghan's latest charitable work in women's education and mental health, her upcoming podcast revival, and a rumored Netflix children's series. The audience was lulled into a sense of ease. But then, as George flipped to the next card in his stack, the tone shifted. "You've spoken quite a bit about your experiences with the British press and the royal institution," he said, careful with his words. "You've described the situation as toxic, even unbearable. But some critics have pointed out that, since stepping away, you and Prince Harry have done numerous interviews, signed media deals, and maintained a very public profile. Can you help viewers understand the distinction between what you were escaping and what you're now embracing?" Meghan's smile flickered, and for the first time, her posture stiffened ever so slightly. "That's a fair question," she began, her voice steady but less relaxed. "There's a difference between being hounded and being heard. We're not trying to hide, we're trying to tell our story on our own terms." George nodded, but didn't move on. "Understood. But some argue that the selective storytelling, especially in your Netflix docuseries and your interview with Oprah, has raised concerns about truth versus perception. Certain scenes and claims have been fact-checked and challenged by independent outlets. Would you say there's room for accountability in how your narrative is shaped?" A beat of silence hung in the air. Meghan's expression tightened as she replied, "I think everyone is entitled to share their lived experience. And I've been very clear that what I went through was painful and deeply personal." "Of course," George said, his voice softening slightly. "But when statements affect others' reputations, especially members of the royal family or individuals like your father and sister, do you believe subjective truth should be held to objective standards?" A flicker of irritation crossed Meghan's face. "George, with all due respect, I think the public doesn't always have the full picture. And frankly, some of the fact-checking is done by sources who are biased or have their own motives." George, maintaining composure, continued, "In fairness, some of the most vocal critics have come from within your own family. Your father has repeatedly said he's willing to reconcile. Why not take that step?" At this point, Meghan's tone shifted more noticeably. "I'm not going to unpack a lifetime of family trauma on live television. I've made choices for my mental health and my family's well-being." The tension was unmistakable now. The previously genial tone of the interview had morphed into something more probing, more serious. Viewers at home could feel the shift. George leaned slightly forward, not aggressively, but deliberately. "There's also been criticism around your humanitarian efforts," he said. "Some argue they're overshadowed by the media circus that follows your public appearances. Do you worry that the message gets lost in the medium?" "I'm doing what I can with the platform I have," Meghan replied, now visibly annoyed. "Isn't that what we want people in the public eye to do, use their influence for good?" George nodded thoughtfully. "Certainly. But there's also a concern that the platform is being curated rather than earned. That the spotlight, rather than the service, is driving the work." Do you think that's a fair concern? Meghan's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, her polished facade slipped. I think it's easy to judge from the outside. Especially when you've never walked a day in my shoes. The studio fell into a brief silence. Even the camera crew, accustomed to emotional interviews, felt the atmosphere grow more charged. George remained calm. People aren't judging your pain, Meghan, he said. They're questioning the presentation of that pain, and how it's been commercialized. That line would later become the quote repeated across cable news for the rest of the week. Meghan took a long breath. George, you're a journalist, and I respect that. But I came here today to highlight important issues, not to defend my existence. If this interview is about dissecting my personal choices instead of spotlighting the causes I care about, then perhaps I'm in the wrong chair. The moment crackled with intensity. George, ever composed, replied, it's both. You're a global figure. Your influence shapes public discourse, whether it's in the realm of politics, media, or philanthropy. To ask questions is not an attack, it's an obligation. There was no dramatic exit, no walk-off, no shouting match. But the emotional impact was far more powerful than any sensational outburst could have been. The camera slowly zoomed out as the interview wound down, the tone now markedly strained. Well, Meghan, thank you for being with us this morning, George said in closing. We appreciate your time. Meghan nodded, though her face betrayed a mix of irritation and restraint. Thank you, George. As the broadcast faded to a commercial, the silence behind the cameras was deafening. Meghan rose quickly, whispered something terse to her assistant, and exited the set briskly. Her team trailed behind, their faces tight with unease. In the control room, a young producer leaned toward a colleague and whispered, that wasn't an interview. That was a dismantling. Social media, still mostly unaware of what had just unfolded, would explode within minutes. But inside GMA's studio, the weight of what had just occurred was already sinking in. George removed his mic and glanced at the floor, not smugly, but contemplatively. He had done what journalists were supposed to do, asked hard questions, pursued uncomfortable truths. But even he hadn't expected the exchange to turn so raw, so real. In a hallway outside the studio, Meghan's assistant was already on the phone with publicists, strategizing damage control. We need to release a statement. Now. Meanwhile, back inside the studio, George reviewed his notes, silently reflecting. He knew that by the time the dust settled, this interview would be talked about for weeks, perhaps months. Not because of theatrics, but because a carefully crafted image had been challenged live, under the glare of studio lights, without warning. The final seconds of the segment faded to black, but the echoes of the confrontation between George Stephanopoulos and Meghan Markle continued to reverberate across the set like a shockwave. In the seconds following the broadcast, there was a stunned silence in the studio, the kind that settles in only after something seismic has occurred live on national television. Everyone, from the camera operators to the executive producers, knew they had just witnessed a cultural lightning strike. Outside the studio, Meghan was briskly escorted down the hallway, her team clustering around her in a protective formation. Her expression was tight, jaw clenched, eyes focused straight ahead. One assistant whispered frantically into a Bluetooth earpiece, coordinating an immediate PR meeting. Another trailed behind with a clipboard, already flipping to the page labeled, Contingency Response. Back inside, George sat in the dressing room with his coffee untouched beside him, reviewing clips of the interview on his monitor. Though calm on the surface, he understood the magnitude of what had just taken place. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from producers, news anchors, publicists, and even a few political figures came pouring in. One message simply read, "You just broke the internet." By the time Meghan's motorcade left the GMA studio parking garage, the hashtags had already begun trending. Hashtag Meghan vs George, hashtag Duchess Defensive, hashtag GMA Confrontation, and hashtag Stephanopoulos Speaks Truth. Twitter, never one to wait for official statements, had exploded into a digital wildfire. Every angle of the interview was dissected, frame by frame, sentence by sentence. One clip, where George said, "To ask questions is not an attack, it's an obligation," had been reposted more than 6 million times within 3 hours. Within the media landscape, reactions were instant, and deeply divided. Major networks scrambled to produce response panels. CNN brought on royal commentators, media ethicists, and celebrity handlers to debate the interview. MSNBC praised George for being a rare journalist who doesn't let optics dictate integrity. Meanwhile, Conservative outlets like Fox News leaned hard into the story, framing it as the day Meghan got a reality check. Even The View opened their show with it. Whoopi Goldberg, shaking her head in disbelief, said, "That wasn't just journalism. That was a mirror being held up in real time." Meanwhile, Meghan's team back in LA went into full damage control mode. They quickly drafted a press release accusing Good Morning America of intentionally deviating from agreed-upon discussion topics and creating a hostile media environment under the guise of journalism. The statement emphasized Meghan's intent to promote her humanitarian work and painted the interview as an ambush dressed in civility. But within hours, ABC countered the claim by releasing email receipts. In the pre-interview documents, all topics, including family, media scrutiny, and the royal family, had been clearly outlined. It became harder to argue that the confrontation wasn't at least partially anticipated. That revelation turned the tide. Public sentiment began to shift. Many who had initially felt sympathy for Meghan started to question the narrative she and her team had cultivated. Was this a case of being held accountable, or being exposed? Across YouTube and TikTok, creators released reaction videos, including body language experts analyzing Meghan's demeanor. Some concluded she had clearly been caught off guard, others praised her composure under pressure. Several popular creators went viral by creating side-by-side edits comparing Meghan's claims from different interviews and pointing out the contradictions. By evening, #Meghan Markle was the top trending subject on all major platforms. News anchors on both sides of the Atlantic covered it as a headline story. In the UK, the Daily Mail plastered, "Markle on live TV," in bold across its front page. The Guardian took a more somber approach. "When image meets interrogation, the collision of fame and truth." Back in California, Meghan sat in her Montecito living room, barefoot, the blazer from the interview now folded on the armrest of her couch. The room was quiet except for the sound of a tablet playing the recorded segment on loop. She watched herself respond to George's sharp questions over and over, trying to understand how quickly the mood had turned, how her controlled, composed energy had unraveled by minute 8. Harry stood nearby, arms crossed, concern etched into his brow. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "They came after you." Meghan exhaled slowly, unsure if she agreed. For someone who had so carefully cultivated her image, the moment had felt like a mirror, one she hadn't expected to be so brutally honest. The next day brought another jolt. A surprise video appeared on Meghan's official YouTube channel titled, "The Whole Truth." There was no flashy thumbnail. No PR-crafted caption. Just a simple video that opened with Meghan sitting in a sunlit room, no makeup, hair loosely tied back, and a notepad in front of her. "I debated whether to post this," she began, "but I want to speak for myself, for once without editing, without spin." She addressed the GMA interview head-on. "Yes, the questions were difficult. No, I didn't expect it to go that way. But maybe it needed to. Maybe I needed to be asked the things no one's dared ask me for a long time." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "I've made mistakes. I've wanted to control my story so badly that maybe I forgot something important. Truth isn't always comfortable. It isn't always flattering, but it matters." In the 23-minute video, she acknowledged that she and Harry had, at times, miscommunicated or oversimplified parts of their story. She admitted to emotional choices, stubborn pride, and sometimes shutting people out who didn't deserve it. But she also reaffirmed her right to heal, grow, and evolve beyond what the public expected. The video stunned the internet. Millions watched it in the first 24 hours. Even harsh critics admitted it was a remarkably candid and vulnerable moment, uncharacteristic of someone often accused of PR polish. The comments were flooded with praise, gratitude, and emotional responses from people who'd felt misunderstood or judged in their own lives. For many, this raw video reset the tone. It shifted the focus from Meghan the brand to Meghan the human. Later that week, George was asked to appear on Nightline for a special one-on-one follow-up. "I don't think it's about humiliating anyone," he said when asked directly about the fallout. "It's about asking the questions our viewers deserve answers to. Meghan is a powerful, intelligent woman. She's fully capable of answering tough questions, and I think, in the end, she did." He added, "If this moment pushes the conversation forward, about media, fame, truth, and accountability, then maybe it was worth the discomfort." ABC's ratings spiked to their highest in over a year. The network released an official statement backing George, emphasizing their commitment to journalistic integrity. Meanwhile, Meghan's YouTube video was picked up by international press as a case study in celebrity vulnerability. Universities, think tanks, and even journalism schools began discussing the interview as a pivotal moment in modern media. Then, just as the buzz began to taper off, Meghan made another unexpected move. She accepted an invitation to appear at the Harvard Kennedy School for a moderated panel on truth in the digital age, alongside journalists, public intellectuals, and yes, George Stephanopoulos. The event sold out instantly. The moderator opened with a joke. It's not every day you get the Duchess and the guy who asked her that question on the same stage. Both Meghan and George laughed. The tension, though not forgotten, had evolved into something else, respect, perhaps even mutual understanding. I don't think I liked you for a few days after that interview, Meghan said, drawing chuckles from the audience. But in hindsight, it made me stop, reflect, and grow. George nodded. That's all any of us can do. In the months that followed, the interview continued to be referenced in books, think pieces, and documentaries as a turning point, not just for Meghan Markle, but for how public figures engage with hard questions in the age of personal branding. It wasn't just a media moment. It was a cultural mirror. Because in a world obsessed with image, sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do is break it.